In 1903, the United States bought a slice of land about this big from the newly established Republic of Panama. Today, that slice of land is worth nearly $20 billion. And answer the what if and how did they do it questions you have about them. If that sounds like fun to you, please consider liking this video. So how did the US get away with this massive land heist? Well, today we're answering exactly that. If you're new here, this is the series where I cover the most egregious land grabs in history. So before we get into how the US acquired the Panama Canal, we should probably talk about why it wanted the canal in the first place. These folks weren't particularly happy about being separated from the rest of their country. As I mentioned, the land that would become the Panama Canal was a part of Colombia at the time. And while the Colombian government didn't want to lose the territory, they also didn't really know how to effectively administer it. But the US offered them citizenship in the Canal Zone or financial incentives to move to other parts of Colombia. And because of that, the people who lived there didn't feel particularly connected to the people who lived in the rest of Colombia. So when the US came around asking if they could build a canal, the people in Panama saw this as an opportunity to improve their situation. These folks were the landowners, since building a canal would require them to part with their land, either voluntarily or otherwise. That same day, the US also recognized the Republic of Panama and established diplomatic relations with the country. The Colombian government said no, but then the US started encouraging the people living in the Panama province to declare independence anyway. This treaty stated that the US had the right to build. It's worth mentioning here that while the US was buying the rights to build a canal across the isthmus from Panama, it wasn't actually buying the entirety of Panama. This meant that even though the US had only purchased the right to build a canal through Panama, it ended up administering a chunk of land that was effectively a US territory for several decades. The rest was still a part of Colombia. Nevertheless, though, the US went ahead and established what's now known as the Panama Canal Zone, which encompassed the 10-mile wide strip of land that the treaty gave it the right to administer. In addition, the US had taken advantage of a technicality in the treaty to expand the canal zone from 10 miles wide to 11 miles wide, operate and maintain a canal through Panama, and also gave the US control over a 10-mile wide strip of land across the Isthmus of Panama where they would put the canal. Eventually, though, Panama grew tired of being treated like this and in the 1960s began to demand that the US relinquish the canal altogether. The US refused to do either of these things, however, and President Theodore Roosevelt even threatened to take the entire canal back. You see, in 1906, Panama tried to renegotiate the terms of the Hay-Buenavarilla Treaty because they realized that the US was taking advantage of them. This led to a situation where the people in the Panama province felt kind of out of place in Colombia, which created a rift between them and the rest of the country. These treaties set a date for the transfer of the canal and the canal zone back to Panama. Now there were also Afro-Caribbean communities that had been brought there to work on the canal after the US had purchased the land from Colombia. They were promised freedom if they agreed to work on the project, and in return for their work they were given housing, medical care, and education. There are some very talented historians out there who have studied this topic deeply and will tell you all sorts of nuanced things about how the French had tried and failed to build this canal years earlier, and how the US wanted to both capitalize on the progress that the French had made and block them from getting their investment back by building the canal themselves. But for our purposes today, it's enough to just know that the US really wanted this canal. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, the canal is located in Panama, and Belisario Porras met with US officials and asked them to support the independence of Panama from Colombia. The US agreed and sent in the Navy to stop Colombia from sending troops to put down the rebellion. But the region that would become Panama was not independent in 1903. It was a part of a larger country called Colombia, but a group of rebel leaders who would soon declare the area's independence with US support. But it's also important to mention, because despite the fact that we're recalling this area Panama today, at the time there were many different groups living there. More specifically, it was a part of a province within that country called Panama. Now this is going to be important later because one of the ways that the US acquired the land that makes up the Panama Canal today is by signing a deal with not just Colombia. For example, there were descendants of indigenous people who had been brought there as slaves, as well as free people of color. In addition, There was a small white population of European descent who had come from Colombia to work in the Canal Zone. But putting aside the diversity of the people who lived there, let's talk about the land itself. You see, the Isthmus of Panama has historically been a very difficult place to traverse. And as the saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. There was one group of Colombians who definitely did not want the Americans to build a canal, however. So what happened next was a game of chicken between the Colombian government and the US, and so in November of 1903, three revolutionary leaders, Manuel Amador Guerrero, Pablo de Arriaga, then the next day, November 3, 1903, the three revolutionary leaders met together and declared the Republic of Panama with Manuel Amador Guerrero as the first president. And then a few weeks later, on December 19, 1903, the U.S. and the Republic of Panama signed what's now known as the Habeas Treaty. In exchange, the U.S. paid the Republic of Panama $10 million in gold plus an additional $25,000 per year as an annuity. In fact, when the treaty was signed, the Republic of Panama only controlled about half of the land that's now the country of Panama. The U.S. built military bases, housing, schools, roads, and other infrastructure in the Canal Zone to support the construction and eventual operation of the canal. Construction of the canal began in earnest in 1904 and took about 10 years to complete. It officially opened in 1914. Now, while construction of the canal was going on, the U.S. and Panama's relationship got a little complicated. Basically, the U.S. was paying Panama $25,000 a year, but in reality, they were spending roughly $4 million a year on the canal. So Panama demanded that the U.S. either pay them $100 million for the value of the canal or double the width of the canal zone to 20 miles. Instead, Panama agreed to accept the $25,000 per year payment for the land plus another $35,000 per year to cover the cost of defending the canal zone. After a lot of negotiation, the U.S. finally agreed to do this in the 1970s, and the Torrijos-Carter treaties were signed in 1977. Ultimately, the U.S. stuck to its word, and on December 31, 1999, full sovereignty over the canal was transferred to Panama. Today, the canal is owned and operated by the Panamanian government and is one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in the world. As for the U.S., it ended up gaining control over the canal and a chunk of Panamanian territory thanks to some savvy diplomacy and gunboat support. Thanks for watching.